Welcome to The Talking Beat, the podcast for the Portland Police Bureau. We are focusing on thoughtful conversations that we hope will inform and provide you with a small glimpse of work performed by Portland Police Bureau members and our partners, as well as issues affecting public safety in our city. On today's show, we are talking about human trafficking. We have a warning to our listeners that this topic is sensitive, and this discussion includes graphic and disturbing content. Therefore, it may not be appropriate for some of our listeners, so please use discretion.
We're just trying to make their lives a little bit better. And if that doesn't involve any part of my team's work, because they don't want anything to do with the formal criminal justice system, we don't take that personal. We firmly have a goal that we want to make their lives better at the end of this. And if that involves the criminal justice system, we're ready to hear their story and we're ready to help them through that difficult process. But if it doesn't involve us, we still are advocating for them.
Today on The Talking Beat, we discuss the collaborative work of the Human Trafficking Unit. Join host Terry Wallow-Strauss, Sergeant Christine Butcher, Robin Miller, advocate and lived experience expert, and Multnomah County Senior Deputy District Attorney J.R. Ujifusa for an in-depth conversation on this important topic. Now, let's jump into the show.
Thanks for joining us today. We're going to start with some necessary background for our listeners who may or may not know too much about this topic. I should preface this by saying that human trafficking can include labor trafficking or sex trafficking. Today, we're mostly centered on the unit's sex trafficking work. Christy, let's talk first about the unit and what you do.
Our primary focus is juvenile sex trafficking. Our next focus is adults wanting to participate in the criminal justice process and tell us their story. We focus on mission work, including directed patrol, addressing community livability issues, as well as hotel missions that focus on buyers, as well as rescuing victims.
Christy, I know this is really collaborative work. Who do you work with?
The Human Trafficking Unit works with a lot of different partners, not only local and federal law enforcement partners, but we partner well with our DA's office. They have a specific human trafficking team that we work very closely with, as well as advocates. We utilize the Victim Services Unit in-house advocates, as well as partner advocates, and rely a lot on live survivors who guide us through best practices.
JR, you work for the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. What's your role working with the Human Trafficking Unit?
So I am the Senior Deputy District Attorney, and I run the Human Trafficking team at the DA's office. I've been involved in really the primary prosecutor for human trafficking related issues since around 2008. So that means anything from working with community partners and law enforcement to build cases and investigations, to identify victims and offenders, to reduce demand and identify businesses and groups that perpetuate trafficking, as well as training and building systems within the criminal justice system to support victims and survivors, and then to hold people accountable through trials. I prosecute. I'm in the courtroom arguing to a jury and a judge why I think an individual has committed certain crimes and what their sentence should be, by representing the people of Multnomah County and helping victims and live survivors go through a pretty complex and daunting system of the criminal justice system.
So one of the lived survivors that you talked about is here today. Thanks for joining us, Robin. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started working with the Police Bureau, and maybe a little bit about your life story?
Yes, thank you. It's nice to be here. Backstory, I met a pimp in 1993 at the Viewpoint Lounge, which was an adult entertainment strip club, and was taken from there to Tacoma and then trafficked up and down the I-5 corridor, Las Vegas, Honolulu, and Phoenix, Arizona for 6 years. So that's the backstory of why I would do something like this, or how I got connected. In 2015, I applied for a job with what was then the New Options for Women program at LifeWorks Northwest. And we would meet bi-weekly with Portland Police at the East Precinct, their sex trafficking unit. And that's where I met JR and the sex trafficking unit. Had I not been welcomed into this work, I don't know where I'd be. But I don't know what the plan would have, how it would have ended.
So first of all, I think you're really inspiring and incredibly strong and brave person. And so I'm really happy that you are helping with this important work. What do you like about what you do? Some people would run away. This would be just too much for them after the life that you've had. And so what motivates you?
Yeah, I would run away if I could. Sometimes I want to. Sometimes I'm afraid. But I have children. I have a grandchild. I have black and brown children and a black grandchild. And what I know about the sex trade and what is proven to be true in the sex trade is that this disproportionately happens to black and brown girls. And that is only one reason I do this. I'm doing something to address a problem. I'm doing something to help other people who may have had very likened experiences that I've had. I like working alongside Portland Police Bureau, Multnomah County DA's office, and a lot of community partners who have worked tirelessly for years to address the commercial sex trade problems in Portland. I think my faith keeps me moving forward, and the amazing partnerships. Honestly, coming full circle and working with a team, not just law enforcement, criminal justice system, to do something that we know could potentially change the course of lives that are impacted.
If I can add, the scope of the problem is a question I get asked often. And it's a scope that we talk about both locally and when we talk on a national level about what the scope is. And obviously, it is highly underreported. If you think about any sort of sex crime, it's underreported, but especially trafficking. The dynamics of trafficking, the ideas of snitching or telling on your trafficker, then in combination with the fact that there's an embarrassment factor in sexual assault crimes, the individuals who report this crime are almost none. And so when we talk about the prevalence of trafficking in our communities, it's extremely high and extremely underreported. I don't like to rank our city. I think that rankings and some numbers aren't as reliable, but we do have a significant problem. We have a significant problem with the demand and the purchasing. We have a significant problem with the demand and purchasing of minors. We have a significant problem with trafficking minors and trafficking adults and the amount of traffickers. And so we have such a significant problem that we are very busy. And Portland Police Bureau and the DA's office and victims advocates are extremely busy. And although I think we're doing good work, there's a lot of work to be done. And what we try to do as the DA's office is work collaboratively with law enforcement. And then when I say hold these individuals accountable, anything from traditional prosecutions and trials and sentencings, we work collaboratively to run the sex buyers accountability class, which is some people would term a John School, to educate these buyers on what their money and their actions fund and support, and the realities of the victims that they pick up and that they purchase, the realities of having sexual acts in someone's neighborhood in a car and throwing their condoms out the window in someone's yard, the realities of being assaulted and robbed and victims being assaulted and robbed, all those things that are related we talk about because it affects this community in many, many ways. The relationships between shootings and homicides and rape and other things, there's no doubt in my mind that they're related to trafficking.
It seems like we really approach this issue differently than we did even maybe a decade ago. So, Christine, I want to ask you about the missions that you do and how you approach this work.
Yeah, this work has changed quite a bit in my experience over 20 years with the Police Bureau. We're definitely doing things differently now. We take a victim-centered approach. We're trauma-informed. We highly trained in those areas, and we're very passionate about the work. We view most of the victims, especially on the street level, as potential victims of human trafficking. The one caveat is most of them don't view themselves as victims, so it's not like they're running to us with their hands up, help me, help me. It's us seeing the situation based on our training and our experiences and working with people like JR, who has vast experiences, bringing on Robin as a live survivor, going with best practices through the nation, and really getting into, the deep, dark parts of trafficking and understanding why many of them don't view themselves as victims. So we really focus on trying to extend our hand, building small tokens of trust with everyone that we contact. And so that's kind of the approach that we take. We're definitely collaborative. As you can see, JR and Robin, we do a lot of things with them. We always have them in mind. Every mission that we do, we're consulting with the DA's office. It's either JR or one of his team members that joins us. We definitely consult with Robin on, our victim rescues, those types of missions, and every directed patrol mission, because the goal on those directed patrol is not only to address the community livability issues that impacts everyone who resides or commutes through those, attends school in those areas. The goal is to reach out to the victims and let them know, hey, we see you, we know what's going on, and we're here to help you when you're ready. We definitely are not in the business of forcing people to be victims. And if they are, in fact, choosing this lifestyle on their own, we're not into, trying to arrest them for anything. We're just trying to make their lives a little bit better. And if that doesn't involve any part of JR or my team's work, because they don't want anything to do with the formal criminal justice system, we don't take that personal.
So, JR, what about the prosecution side? How did you start and what have you learned?
When I first was introduced to this issue, it was around 2008 out at East Precinct. I was the DA out at East Precinct, the community DA. And I was naive and I was ignorant to the dynamics at play in trafficking. And of course, unfortunately, the people out there visible in a community are the victims. They're the ones on the street. They're the ones in the car. They're the ones whose faces are on the internet. And so the simplest solution at the time, or the solution that people thought, was to focus on trying to get those individuals off the street, off websites and other things by traditional law enforcement means. And we've learned a lot from that. And we've learned that these individuals are victims, and there's an entire industry and individuals that are sometimes forcing, many times coercing or manipulating individuals to be out there. And they're the victims and yet the face of what sex trafficking is about. And so we have drastically changed. I would say that change happened between 2008 and 2010 or 11 to focus on being victim-centered, trauma-informed, and to help victims understand that we're there, that we're supportive, and that we are wanting to help. But at the same time, focusing on holding buyers who are the demand of this issue, and traffickers and those who help traffickers by facilitating the trafficking, holding them accountable by any means possible.
I'm really glad you brought up that misrepresentation, because I think there is a lot of ignorance around the subject. And I know that, we've all seen the movies and the television shows that kind of glamorizes the sex trade. And maybe people don't really understand some of the dark side of it. A lot of times we get feedback from people as well, from the community, saying, why don't we just leave these women alone?
Well, first I'll say that if somebody wants to be left alone, I will leave them alone. I meet folks where they're at. I don't want to take anybody's agency from them. I support people with their decision making, but when we're talking about children or folks with cognitive delays, diagnosed disabilities, that's a little different. But in my experience in 6 years, I was raped countless times. I had guns put in my face, strangled, jumped from moving cars, walked in the rain, snow, on Easter, Christmas, pregnant. I happened to have the night off. I went into labor with my oldest daughter because my trafficker came home after he'd been gone for 2 days smoking dope. And so he passed out and I stayed home, went into labor and had a baby, and then was back out on the track the day I got out the hospital. I worked through my pregnancy with my son up until 7 months when my mom came and built me out of jail in Phoenix, Arizona, and then returned to my pimp. I left him in 99 and was pregnant with my last child, who is my youngest, and I never went back. Nothing about my experience with him was glamorous.
And it was incredible and mind-blowing, as your stories are.
And that's
It's not unique,
bad.
right?
It's not unique. That's nothing. That's nothing compared to what I've seen in the 10 years I've done this work, what I've heard, all of those atrocities times 1,000 done unto children, families. And I can't even say like what I've seen on that back end.
If I can add on to that, although I think Robin's perspective is extremely important, from my perspective, or at least from law enforcement, what we observe is if an individual were to actually look at the realities of what happens on the street, in hotels, in apartment complexes, in cars, and take a look at the amount of violence, the amount of sexual assault, the amount of manipulation and control, and the lack of choices these individuals have, not only the individuals who are being actively trafficked by a trafficker, both minors and adults, but adults who may not have a trafficker at that time. Many of them have been trafficked as children before. Many of them have been trafficked as adults before, but those same violent buyers that we prosecute for serial sexual assaults, for homicide, for strangulation and kidnapping and other very serious crimes are out there, and they don't choose between someone who's trafficked and someone who's not. It's an extremely dangerous place to be at, where we know from past experience from this local area to national area that individuals engaging in the commercial sex trade are targeted. They're targeted. They're looked at as fungible or ignored, or individuals who won't be looked for if they go missing. And so there's an extreme amount of violence and danger associated with this by the buyers and traffickers who are involved in sex trafficking.
So how does the unit interact with these women?
We are not arresting women for the crime of prostitution, even though it technically is still a crime in the state. But we're not arresting them. We're not charging them. And the DA's office definitely isn't issuing any of those charges. We're not transporting them to jail, nothing like that. We are making contact with them, and we are identifying them. And we do that for a number of reasons. Number one, we're hoping to build a little bit of trust at the beginning of our meet. Sometimes we meet these women several times, whether it's over a couple of months, a few years span. And so we're having multiple contacts with them, and we're building trust hopefully each time. And the hope is that one day when they're ready to tell us their story, they'll remember us and how we treated them, and they'll know that they can call us when they're in danger or they feel unsafe.
So where do you even begin? How do you, Robin, you said you meet people where they're at. How do you even begin to knock down some of these barriers that these women face to actually be able to leave this work and regain their lives?
Kindness, understanding, empathy, quiet listening, active listening. I don't always go for the tell me your story. I mean, you don't want me to do that. What do you need? Where are you going? Who's at home? How does that make you feel?
What kind of resources are available?
Not enough. Not many.
We are extending services that we can. I think where we lack services is we're really good at meeting basic needs. We can go buy you some food if you haven't eaten in a while. And my team does that on a regular basis. And we can find a voucher for you to stay in a hotel. We have a lot of good partners with hotels in the area. We can meet those basic safety needs. But beyond that, I think the county and the state is lacking in mid to long-term resources. And I know Robin does a ton of work throughout the nation on trying to build those services to include, like employment skills. Because if you think about, these victims' lives, sometimes they start before the age of 12, right? Being victimized. So if you're trying to get them out of the life and hopefully get them into some other productive form of work, they don't have any skills. We all learn those skills in our teenage and early 20s. If they've been in the life for that part of their life, they're not going to possess the same skills, that their other peers would. So there's a lot of things that I think we as a society overlook, but there's a lot of gaps. But I do know, working with many advocates throughout the community, that they're trying to address those gaps and they're doing the best they can. But we as a system, we recognize that there are gaps.
Christy, we've heard a lot from the community, feedback about issues affecting their neighborhoods. How does sex trafficking impact a neighborhood or the livability for our residents?
We've received many community concerns, like I talked about, folks that live in the area, work in the area, have kids that attend school in the area. They've told me things: I don't feel safe walking around my neighborhood. I've been propositioned several times. Men stop and roll down their windows and ask me how much. I don't feel safe with my kids playing in the street because in the background is women wearing hardly any clothes, waving at every car passing by, maybe doing short dances in the middle of the street. We've received many complaints from the school, kiddos not feeling safe walking to and from, or when they're out on their lunch, the girls are also getting approached by men thinking that they're available to be purchased. And so as soon as those started coming in on a really regular basis and people were reaching out via email and phone, not only contacting me, the chief's office, the mayor's office, I knew we had a really big problem on our hands. And not only the community, but law enforcement officers in the area working in their districts or on their way, command staff members on their way to meetings passing through the area. They could not believe how many women were out there wearing little to no clothes. Didn't matter the weather, if it was weather appropriate or this type of very cold, wet weather. The clothing style doesn't change much. And so that was quite alarming, because to hear people say they don't feel safe in their own neighborhood, they should definitely feel safe in their own house, in their own neighborhood. The kids should be able to go out and play. So these missions not only focus on buyers and identifying traffickers, as well as reaching out to the victims, but they address all those community livability issues. So we have a big problem near 82 and Sandy, where women can be seen at all hours of the day standing on corners. Sometimes they walk up and down. Sometimes they're very stationary. If you spend any amount of time out there, you can see buyers circling the blocks and lined up in people's neighborhood. People live here. They see this every single day, and they're just waiting for a chance to be able to talk with one of the women and hopefully reach some agreement. And then usually, the act either will happen in a car or a nearby hotel. Sometimes the woman will get into the car and drive. So us being in the area, we're addressing all of those issues, as well as all the related criminal activity that human trafficking and blatant prostitution bring in. So I talked a lot about the buyers. Let's talk about the traffickers. The traffickers are also in the area. They're keeping an eye on their person or people. Sometimes they run multiple people. So they can be seen circling the area. Sometimes on our missions, we will be, watching a specific person, and you can tell when like a rival trafficker pulls up, because the women cannot run fast enough away from this person. And so that indicates violence to us. And so we're making a plan to stop and identify that person. We take everyone to jail for crimes on these missions. And so, if we can't get a participating victim for a trafficking charge, well, that person's going to go to jail for the gun that they're carrying, or maybe the drugs that they're dealing, maybe an outstanding warrant. We collaborate as well with probation and parole. So if they're already on paper, if we can get them, committing some sort of violation of their probation, we're going to take them to jail for that. It's a very violent game. So not only are our traffickers armed, but we're contacting buyers on a regular basis who are armed. And so we're just when we run these missions, we're trying to tackle a lot of the livability, and it's kind of a neat thing when you bring a large law enforcement presence to a troubled area. It slowly, it actually spreads pretty fast through that criminal network. The heat is on, avoid 82 and Sandy, and all that sort of criminal activity, it subsides. Sometimes it subsides for just the night until we leave. If we're able to be consistent enough, it'll subside for months. And we know our work's not done out there. It's an ongoing process. As far as the scope of trafficking, I know Robin and JR can speak to this more, but Portland is a very popular place for trafficking.
As JR mentioned before, I don't want to categorize this, but how big of a problem do we have?
In my heart, and why I believe this, having done this work now for 2.5 years, is the demand in Portland is very high. We have a very liberal view on sex as a society here. We have a lot of strip clubs. We have a lot of lingerie shops. And I just don't know as a society if we've done a good job in stating, that purchasing sex is illegal. Because a lot of people are willing to do it, and we catch buyers that have done it more than once. On our missions, I partner with Robin, and when we go to make contact with potential victims, I'm out of the car making sure the scene is safe. Definitely, have other officers in the area, watching our backs for potential violent acts from buyers or traffickers. But as soon as I realize the scene is safe, Robin is out of the car making contact with the victim. So there's a lot of mistrust from victims to law enforcement, and no fault of their own. They're taught to not trust us. And so I try not to hold the conversation long, and I'm introducing Robin, or more like Robin's introducing herself, and she takes over the conversation. And our whole goal, is to make sure that they feel safe. Like I said, a lot of times they're not going to give us much in the beginning. But the way that I get through to them is, hey, I'm not here to arrest you. We're out here to contact you. Do you feel safe? And they'll kind of look at you like, yeah. And then I'll ask, have you had any bad dates that we should be aware of? We're looking, to make sure that everyone's safe out here. Has anyone been extremely violent to you? And sometimes they're really open and they'll describe the car. They can give you an awesome description of the person, that's done extremely violent sexual things to them, maybe robbed them. And so we really try to get through to them by addressing their safety as opposed to coming at them through an enforcement lens. We're just trying to make their lives a little bit better. And if that doesn't involve any part of JR or my team's work, because they don't want anything to do with the formal criminal justice system, we don't take that personal. We firmly have a goal that we want to make their lives better at the end of this. And if that involves the criminal justice system, we're ready to hear their story and we're ready to help them through that difficult process. But if it doesn't involve us, we still are advocating.
One thing that's changed is what Sergeant Butcher was talking about when she mentioned building that relationship and just opening the door. When I've been out on missions, I try to empower those people on the street to do just that, to take care of themselves, because they can be trusted. That's the huge difference. That's a huge full circle moment for me, that they can be trusted. And they've got some detectives. They know what the long game means now. And the long game is, are you going to be there for the lifetime? Or are you going to be there until your job ends? And from what I've seen from this unit, they are there for the long game.
This is such a serious topic, but are there any success stories that you can share?
I think the best success story I can come up with, in my short time here is somebody who the unit had been keeping in contact with. She was a child at the time of the first contact, reached out over 2 years later, and they hadn't heard from the person in a while and said, "Hi, I'm ready to tell you my story. Where can we meet?" And, the prosecution has been successful. That is, it's still ongoing, so I can't give a bunch of details, but the trafficker was indicted over 2 years ago, and we're still awaiting trial. So it's a very long game. There's really no giant short wins other than to know, the victim has somebody to reach out to if and when they're ready. And we feel that we support them, through the entire process.
JR, I know you're involved at the national level. What have you learned, and how are we doing in Portland?
I work with a lot of amazing individuals throughout this nation that work on trafficking issues. And I meet with experts in all different fields, and I'm really proud of the work we do locally. And I think it stands out nationally for the work we do. And part of that is having a collaborative team, and Portland Police Bureau is a big part of that are empathetic and thoughtful and sensitive to the dynamics and the real issues of what happens with sex trafficking and the victims of sex trafficking and being victim-centered. And I'm proud of that work, and I see it on a micro and macro scale when I go to Washington, D.C., and I meet with our National Advisory Committee, and I hear what everyone else is doing, and I hear the good work, and I think about the good work we do. I'm really proud of what I'm a part of, and the fact that Portland Police Bureau has been so supportive in providing sergeants and detectives and officers to continue to work on this problem, because they also acknowledge that this happens to the most vulnerable in our communities.
Thank you all for being here today and shedding the light on this important topic. Thanks for the great work you're doing.
Thanks for listening to The Talking Beat. Do you have a question for us? You can call and leave a message on our dedicated voicemail line at 971-339-8868. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. More episodes can be found at our website,